you take this one, and I'll call on somebody who hasn't talked in a while.
What can the agile team do to resolve the situation? A trend of stories uncompleted at the end of the iteration has become apparent. Multiple team members worked on these stories and no blockers were identified.
Hmm?
What can the agile team do to resolve this situation? So we have stories that are completed at the end of iteration.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have a sprint review, and we just realized that some stories weren't completed at the end of iteration.
Beautiful.
So multiple team members have worked on these stories and no blockers were identified. I mean, throughout the whole sprint, nobody realized that they weren't incomplete.
Okay.
So what can the agile team to do to resolve this situation?
Mm-hmm.
A, pull the stories back into the product backlog and wait for less intensive iteration to work on them. Well, I mean, it depends with how important the stories are to the features that they're producing,
Okay.
and then use the next iteration for.
Let me ask one more follow-up about that. So what you said, it depends if they go back in the backlog about how important, right? So what do you, like if they're super important, what does that mean? What happens if they're super important?
If they're super important to the feature that they're releasing or they intend to release, I don't think maybe it should go back to the backlog and they should work on it, or they should put it back into in progress.
All right, let's check it out. Just pause for 1 second. You're doing great. Dustin, if we don't finish something like a story at the end of an iteration, like what should they do? Like with Mary, what should they do with that story? What has to happen?
They should put in the next iteration.
Yeah, and technically they put it in the backlog, and then it can get moved to the other one. So think of it like as a process. It oftentimes will move to the next one, but we kind of want to be like, it has to go back to the backlog and be brought in again. So like that's the way to kind of think through it. The question I do have, Mary, is like less intensive iteration, meaning like we're working in 2-week chunks. Those are iterations.
Yeah.
Are some of them like hard, fast, and some of them like, we're gonna chill out? Like how should we think about that?
Well, when it's a less intensive, I mean, it depends with the complexity of the features that you're working on.
Okay.
And it depends with I don't know, with the amount of work that the developers are willing to put in.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if it's gonna be less intensive or just the same or even more intensive.
Okay, the way we want to think about it is it's going to be equal intensive. And if you think about like there's these things called story points, and they talk about like the complexity of the work. And so let's just say we can get 20 story points with like 20 hardness points. We can get that done. Whether it's in across 4 stories, like 1, 2, 3, 4, that's like equals like 20, like just a made up number. Or if it's 20 stories, like 20 equals 20. Like in reality, 20 baby ones is equal to, 4 medium-sized ones. But like what we're trying to do is create in these iterations like steady flow. Like it's going to go, it's not going to be that much difference between like each one. We can't plan everything out perfectly, but it's not going to be all herky-jerky. Like some are hard, some are easy, some are crazy, some are not. Like that's not the way to think about it. So when this says wait for a less intensive iteration, like there shouldn't be a such thing. It should be nice, steady eddy as we go through the game.
Okay.
It's gonna be.
We use the next iteration for a team spike to determine feasibility of completing the stories. I will hang on to that because that kind of makes sense.
Okay.
Put the stories in the backlog. Put the stories in the blocked column and work with the product owner to remove impediments. should we have a blocked column?
Oh, let's think about it. So like on a Kanban board, right? That's like a visual board to show work.
Mhm.
So we have like the backlog in a sense, like the to-do stuff. Like that's all the stuff that we could get to, whatever. We have like this is just in the general sense, like things that are working or doing, like that's what the team's working on. Maybe there's like a QA section and maybe there's like a done section. There could be more, it just represents the flow of the work. You design how you want it, represented to the work you're doing. And there's also one that's called like blocked. Like, Mary, what do you think, like if a story was like being done, but then it got moved over to blocked, what do you think that would tell the team? What would it say to people?
I think it will tell me that this work has been blocked. Nobody's supposed to do it at the moment.
Tweak on the back end of that. It's like, hey, this work there's trouble here. Like somebody needs to help me. I can't move this any further because I need somebody's help. Either like I'm depending on something or I don't have the tools, don't have the know-how, something's broke. Like I need, so it's clearly, it's not like people wouldn't look at it and say like, oh, that's going okay. They'd be like, no. There's a problem here. It's very, very clear. Like, what are we doing to clean this up and help them move it? So that is a thing, the blocked column.
Okay.
Just showing like, yeah, we got a problem here.
Work with the product owner to further break down the stories in the backlog and update the definition of ready. So from your explanation of block, I think I'm with C and D at this moment.
Okay.
But since it's been blocked, put the stories in the blocked column and work with the product owner to remove impediments. I mean, they have worked on it before and they realized, and they didn't see any blockers. They didn't identify any blockers. So why did it go back to blocked again? I mean, if this is a team, an agile team that is working towards self organization, and they all know the agile methodologies, and they have refined their stories, and they didn't see any blockers until the sprint review. I don't see why it should go back to be blocked. I'm just thinking like that. I think I should.
Right. If they can't find any blockers, it definitely shouldn't go into the block column. Like if there's nothing holding them back, there might be another reason why we're not getting the work done.
So work with the product owner to further break down the stories in the backlog and update the definition of ready. I think I'll stay with D.
Okay, you'll stay with D. Mary's gonna stay with D. Awesome. I appreciate it. Let's go with Dustin, and then we're gonna bring in a couple other people. Hey, Lily.
I'd have to agree as well with D. What comes to mind is that if the stories were uncompleted, they may not have been ready to be worked on. And so I just look at maybe refining them, break them down to smaller chunks. And so they would meet that definition already. So I'll stick with D.
That's awesome. Yeah. And so like I think about like, and then if you're having any questions about this and being like, oh, Agile's so fancy, it's not. It's like, hey, if we have work, like what keeps you from finishing things? It's either it's not well defined, it's too much work, it's too big, it's dependent on other people, that's holding you back. You don't have the skills, technical capacity, or whatever. Those are kind of reasons. There's probably more, but like in this one, like there's no issues, so that's off the blocks. We just got stuff there. And then we got to figure out like, okay, what could we do? The most relevant thing here, it's not like just wait till an easier time. That's not a thing. A team spike is just a focused, like we're setting a card out there if we have to go and do some research in a sense on something. We don't know how to technically do this. We're going to establish, like we're going to set aside a couple hours in a sprint to say, hey, we're allocating a team member to go deep, research this so that we can get a solution around it. We're just, being cognizant of the time and putting it out there. So that's not the problem here. That's a one-time thing, not a multiple-time thing. And then there is nothing blocked, so we don't put it there. So the only thing left is like, let's break these stories down. Like you mentioned, clean them up, get them to a point where we can understand them. And then we might want to have a conversation with our team to be like, hey man, we need to push harder to make sure that when we bring work in, it's actually ready to be worked. And that is the definition of ready, what can come in. That's why that works. Super duper. See you later, Jose. Dustin, Brent, Jillian, Jose, good job. Everybody, good job.